Konbanwa. Today, I'm going to be reading you an excerpt from a chapter of my novel Cyber Revolution. This was published, I believe, in 2017. I want to give you a trigger warning before you proceed. This excerpt contains content that involves physical abuse, abduction, and detention of immigrants. The main character, Rosa, is the CEO of a fictional tech company called FFM, which stands for Fast Future Machines. This chapter takes place after FFM discovered that the government was violating their terms of service by using their computers to create a registry of Muslims. Another content warning there, Islamophobia. This chapter takes place after FFM disabled, i.e. bricked, all computers that the government was using for the registry. Tajima Show! On the afternoon of December 8th, the President signed Executive Order 13,954 to establish internment camps for Muslims, including those who were U.S. citizens, also domestic terrorists, as well as illegal aliens, to be operated by the Immigration and Customs Enforcement Agency, ICE. Not only were the suspected internment camps officially announced, so were several unexpected camps throughout the nation. The country seemed torn about the issue. There were people supporting it who felt this would increase their job opportunities. There were people who supported it because they felt it made the country safer. There were people who supported it because it came from the president. There were also many people who opposed it. There were people who planned protests for the very next day. Sanctuary cities began to ponder how to handle this change. Until this point, sanctuary cities prevented the local police from turning aliens over to ICE. Some cities wanted to do more. Churches, many of whom already offered sanctuary, clarified that they were places that were safe from the internment camps. As the day wore on, reports of raids at mosques started to get released by the press. Some liberals compared it to Kristallnacht. Yet it appeared ICE was very careful not to break glass. Looters, however, did damage some mosques long after ICE had left. There was spray paint on several mosques, and a few were even burned down. It was late when Rosa finally made it home. She'd eaten dinner at work. She wished she could talk to Brent and the girls, but it was too early in Andorra for them to be up. She sent them an email telling them that she loved them. She changed into her nightgown, brushed and flossed, and read a little in bed. She took off her wedding band, placed it on the nightstand, and turned off the light. It was almost midnight when she finally drifted off to sleep. She woke up suddenly, blinded by a light pointing at her eyes. She sat up and suddenly felt something slipped over her head. It had gone from total brightness to total dark. As she reached for her face, she felt hands forcibly grab her arms. She started to scream. Her wrists, her wrists were forced behind her back, and she felt something get wrapped around her wrists. She was being lifted from the bed. She was still screaming. Rosa tried to think through her options and then said, FF phone, call 911. Her phone responded, calling 911. After a pause, the phone said, please check your internet connection. She felt herself being dragged out of her bed and forced to stand. She shouted, stop! You don't need to do this. You aren't Nazis. They seemed to ignore her. Once standing, they forced her to walk out of her room towards the stairs. They carried her by her arms down the stairs. Occasionally, she tried to resist, but when she did, they would twist her hand, sending a jolt of pain through her. The temperature dropped as she was forced through an outer door. It was freezing cold out, and her feet were bare. She yelled, I'm being abducted! Call the police! Hoping a neighbor would hear her. Despite being a CEO at a major tech company, Rosa had a modest home, mostly because it had so many great memories. It was also a great place for the kids to grow up, with several friends living within a few blocks of their house. Still, It was an upper middle class house when they bought it, and there were only about 3 houses within earshot. She had no idea what time it was, just that she should still be asleep. Her captors were forcing her to climb into some type of vehicle. She knew this was probably her last chance to escape. She yelled, "Help! Call the police!" one more time and tried kicking her legs. They lifted her by the arms and threw her forward. She heard the sound of a door shut. With her hands behind her back, she couldn't catch herself and landed on her chest and face. There was a sound of an engine and tires screeching. The floor began to shake. She rolled to the side so that she had less pressure on her face. It was hard to tell how long they drove. She heard nobody the entire time. She didn't know if her captors were with her or in another part of the vehicle. It was a little warmer in the vehicle than outside, but she was just in her nightgown. After a while, she began to shiver. She wriggled her feet to help keep them warm. When the vehicle finally stopped, she was lifted up and forced to walk. Wherever they were, it was warm. They walked for a long time. There were sounds of other people. She could hear people crying, screaming, and people having callous-sounding chit-chat. They eventually stopped, and the bag from over her head was removed. The light was blinding. It took her some time to focus. She was inside a concrete room with other women. It appeared most of them were Middle Eastern. There was a few men and women in ICE uniforms. A man freed her hands, and then the men left the room, closing it behind them. One of the ICE women said, "Your new clothes are here," and pointed to piles of red uniforms. "Remove all your old clothes and place them here." She pointed at an empty bin. "I will collect and tag any jewelry you have. You can keep your glasses. You can also keep a solid metal wedding band, as long as it has no jewels. Once done, put on your clothes." Another woman in the ICE uniform repeated the message in a language that may have been Arabic. Women started to undress. Rosa and a few other women hesitated. A heavy-set ICE agent went up to Rosa, grabbed her by the shoulders, and shouted, "Change now, or we won't ask so politely." Rosa complied. She wasn't wearing any jewelry. Her wedding band was probably still on her nightstand. Most of the other prisoners also appeared to have little or no jewelry. Some were even in pajamas, and a few were in their underwear. She was glad she hadn't had to take the cold trip in her underwear. Many of the women were wearing hijabs and refused to remove them. There were no hijabs in the piles of clothes. The ICE agent said that they would be issued hijabs in a few days. The agents used pepper spray on a few of the women who refused to remove their hijabs. After being sprayed, some removed them, but a few still resisted. Finally, the agents physically ripped the remaining hijabs from the women, taking some hair in the process. All but one of the prisoners were nude now and placing their clothes in the bin. The one woman who hadn't complied was speaking in a panicked tone in a language Rosa couldn't identify. She was an older woman with gray hair. The ICE agent, who had spoken in a foreign language, said, "Does anybody speak Farsi?" A younger woman with curly hair, who was naked, raised her hand while covering her breasts with her other arm. The agent said, "Tell her what to do," pointing to the prisoner, who was still clothed. The woman, who had raised her hand, went to the dressed prisoner and started talking to her softly and pointing. The older woman began nodding and walked over to the bin. She removed her clothes and placed them neatly in the pile. Rosa and the other women had found new clothes. They all started getting dressed. Once all the prisoners were dressed in uniforms that fit fairly well, the door was opened, and the male ICE agents returned. One of the men said, "Line up." There was no interpretation, but those who spoke foreign languages seemed to understand. They quickly formed a line. They were led down several corridors. The structure seemed like an unused prison. It was mostly steel and concrete. There were small cells made from solid metal mesh. easy to see and hear through, with holes no larger than Rosa's thumb. On each door was printed a number. Each cell had a metal bench that ran the length of one side, with a thin pad on it and a blanket. It wasn't a toilet, just a hole in the floor. There was a short metal sink. There was a copy of a book with beautiful foreign text on it that Rosa assumed was the Quran. Each cell had a tall, narrow window with frosted glass. It was clearly too thin for anyone to get more than a hand through, even if the glass could be broken. They were each assigned a room and locked in. Rosa got one of the first empty cells, which was numbered 0589. She wanted to sleep, but really needed to pee. Anyone would be able to see her going. There were they were there were only women, but it was still embarrassing. She also wasn't very good at squatting to pee. She tried sleeping for a while, but her bladder was too full. Finally, she pulled down her pants and squatted. She tried not to think about where she was and eventually was able to pee. After she went pee, she got into the pad and fell asleep. This has been reading of a chapter from Cyber Revolution, and I will post details on how you can buy it at the bottom. Again, right now, the posting schedule is a little wonky because between writing, so uh, TBD when the next post is. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed the reading, and it is certainly a bit different from how the current president is maybe operating, uh, but very, very relevant. That I got though.